I do think like that is the way to avoid becoming empire yourself, is to stay so true to your values and so true to your perception of the world that you are not blinded by the ability to shape the world into your image, but instead you let it go and you die when it's your time to die and you embrace that.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. What if rebellion didn't look like rage, but like tenderness? What if our most subversive acts weren't marches or manifestos, but small, consistent choices to show up, to love, to share, and to stay? In this episode, I'm joined by David Gate, poet, essayist, and author of Rebellion of Care. David's work doesn't just critique the systems that dehumanize us, it imagines something more. It calls us into a quiet, radical resistance built not on power or control, but on presence, friendship, and generosity. We talk about the loneliness epidemic and how showing up for your friends might just be one of the most revolutionary things that you can do. We explore the trap of individualism, the unsustainable pace of hustle culture, and why dependency, so often seen as weakness, is actually holy. David unpacks how care becomes rebellion, how art speaks truth, and why Jesus' refusal to seize power is the kind of leadership the world is desperate for. This is a conversation about letting go of the need to win, about building new ways of living that are rooted in compassion rather than control. It's about becoming people who embody the values we claim to believe, not just in theory, but in our kitchens, our neighborhoods, our shared tools, our friendships. Whether you're tired of institutions that don't deliver, searching for a better way to build community, or just wondering what it means to live a faithful life in a fractured world, join us. Here is my conversation with David Gate. David, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I love your poetry, and your new book, Rebellion of Care, is, I think, fascinating for me, because when I think of rebellion and revolutions, I think of scrappy underdogs taking power and then deciding to become the institutions themselves and then subjugating other people. How did you figure out like Rebellion of Care was a common theme, something that you cared about and you wanted to express to the world?
After spending a lot of time online, very, I think, accurately criticizing religion and politics and things I saw wrong with the world, I wanted to concentrate this point in my life on what are we building? You know, what do I see replacing various power structures in the world? Because we depend on them. And I do think hierarchies are somewhat inevitable. But what are we actually doing? What can we actually build? How can we actually think about doing things differently? What kind of world are we imagining? And it really takes a vivid imagination to get there, because the world we live in just seems so unavoidable that I think the work of, I think in this book, like the work of the poetry really is to settle into us in a different form than just simply analysis or critique or discussion, you know, finding art forms that can expand our minds and hearts. So that's what was really I was hoping to achieve.
As you grew up, North London,
Yep.
You said you spent a few years in Belfast.
Yes.
You lived in Florida. You're now living in Asheville, North Carolina. Yep. You've lived in pretty diverse places, but places where you may be confronted with what the world is trying to give you. Even with London and Belfast, Florida, North Carolina, are there any common themes that you see? The world is set up in a certain way that is fighting against us humans.
Well, what if I'm really start to get a little political and to really hone in, I think it's the system we live in is the capitalist system, which is the same in London and Florida and Belfast and North Carolina, and the expectations of that system, how it demands our lives and our bodies and our time in order to function, and really only rewards those that seem to be the meanest or the most competitive or the ones that work 100 hours a week, and it's only willing to reward what I would say is a moderately decent life to a very, very few individuals, yet demands the rest of us heed to it and bow to it and serve it. And so that tingles my religious history, and thinking about idolatry and thinking about that this is just isn't the way the world was meant to be, and how we're made to be. And really, we have all the resources to make it a different way. It doesn't have to be like this. And so yeah, I think that's consistent in all the places I've lived, and I think it's the story of Western culture, really.
Well, we have capitalism. Western Christianity has taken a lot of that upon themselves and decided to follow a lot of institution and power and a hierarchy rather than embody the ways of Jesus and the good news that he brought, which is a different system, a different power structure than we find here in the West, even in the church today.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that fascinate you and that draw you to Jesus as somebody to show us a better way to live in this world?
In terms of the direction I've taken in regards to my religious ideas, my political ideas, my ideas about community and sharing and care, the way I approach art and creativity, all really stem from what I learned about Jesus and understood Jesus to be. So I just went far down that road. It's like people will say, oh, Jesus was, loving and good and kind and compassionate. But like if you just keep going with that leads you into direct confrontation with everything that is not gentle and kind and generous and gracious. And I just kept following that path into confrontation and continue to. And I think that's the way of the cross, you might say, or the narrow road. I think if you are a person that is captivated by the teachings of Jesus and the life of Jesus, then I think this is the road for you.
If it is kindness and care in the midst of our friendships, our relationships, our community, in the midst of us being grounded to the earth, to be with the land, in the midst of figuring out how we could cooperate and share together, what is this care and kindness, and why is it so subversive to the crazy capitalist world that we live in?
I think everything about this culture wants us to feel like an individual. So everything is geared towards our own personal well-being, success, particularly success. And so everything is shaped that way. So particularly, you take something that seems unrelated to that, but like the reliance in America on cars. It's all about us being able to go wherever we want to go, whenever we want to go, and that I am totally reliant. And the first thing you do when you're a teenager in America is you get your driver's license, and then you go and you be free. And there's a lot of good about that, but we've set up our cities and our entire nation to not value buses and trains and public transport. And so you get the fruit of that, which is that if you cannot afford a car, or you cannot afford to fill it up every week, or the monstrous insurance, then you are at an absolutely chronic disadvantage in American life, because the entire, you can't get your kids to school, you can't get to work, you can't get to the store. There's no walkable neighborhoods you can count on. In most cities you can count on one hand. So it's simple things like that make me feel like everything is geared towards us as individuals. And so then the rise of technology and the rise of social media has just reinforced that continually, that we are to purchase our way to happiness, where we need to buy the best products, feel more satisfied from social media, become the better influencer, get more followers, get more likes, present our life to the world in a certain way. And so all of this is just, it actually isolates us. And so we have this I think, a gift of the internet and the gift of social media in being that we are able now to connect more freely and more quickly than we ever have in the history of the human race. And yet we feel more alone. And so it really is this drive to isolation, which makes us weaker, makes us more depressed, and that means we have less energy. Then all that goes into our work and our jobs, and nothing's left for our lives and nothing's left for our communities. And so we have to kind of resist. This is why care is, to actually properly care for yourself and then to care for others is really a resistance to the way things are, especially to care for others, to actually spend time being in committed relationships, being there for one another, sharing, not everybody owning a lawnmower and a drill and a saw, and you share these things. Like, there's no reason for us all to own everything, but it takes a little time, it takes relationships, it takes grace, forgiveness when they don't bring back your chainsaw when you lend it to them, and it takes relationships, and that energy. We have so little energy for relationships and other people that it is crushing us.
Dependency is really difficult in a independent type nation that America is, that values the independence of the individual, that we can do everything and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and press through and do hard things by ourselves, the rugged individual. How have you found a community to fight against that, to resist that? It's one of the most difficult things, I think, to resist in America. It's just really, really hard. Everything is flowing one way of independence and individualism. Yeah. So what does that look like for you? How do we do this?
I think I'm speaking particularly to men, but I think this applies to women too, is you have to be able to be seen to be weak. And if you're not willing to be seen to be weak and not, self-actualizing in every part of your life, if you're not willing to do that, to be perceived that way, then you will never get over your own individualism. The only way you'll ever accept help is at absolute breaking point or beyond breaking point, when you're absolutely blowing up your life. And that's what we see. That's the pattern we see, particularly in men, of not asking for help, not reaching out, not being willing to be seen to be weak and small and able to not provide for themselves and families and so forth. And so I think really that is the first step, because emotionally, then everything comes from that. So once you're able to become somewhat comfortable with being perceived as being weak or small or insufficient, then you can actually proceed in a way where you're not embarrassed, ashamed, hiding your dependence on others. And once you do that, you then realize the extent that you can actually help other people. So I think there is a lot of compassion in this world. I think there's a lot of people do want to help other people, but often we don't know what's going on in their lives. Often, we don't want to patronize them. We don't want to belittle them. We don't want to make them feel weak or small or insignificant. And so we tend to stay out where we could offer help. And I think really once those barriers are down emotionally, to like we accept our place in the world as fragile, finite beings who don't have it all together. All of us are just winging it. No one knows what they're doing, and hopefully, my hope is that people don't wait until they're in their 50s, 60s, and 70s to work that out, and we can maybe work it out a little earlier. And that really is humility. Like, it is what it is. It's accepting the finite nature of our lives. And once you do that, then that's the doorway. Then I think to actually living a life of care for yourself and for others.
Today, we live in an anti-institutional age. We live in an age where institutions are breaking and falling, and saying that they actually aren't caring for us the way that we want them to.
Yeah.
And so we're tearing things down. I think it's an age of breaking. But what I love about what you're trying to do is that we have a breaking, like we want to rebel and kind of break the system of what's going on now. But then there is this building aspect and part, which hopefully we're going to get to at some point, is like, is there going to be a better way forward? Is there a place in the building aspect of what's next that institution and anti-institution maybe come together in a different way, or a new way, where we may need some large,
Yeah,
operations to help
yeah.
us? How do you see that fitting going forward?
I think institutions are inevitable. I think we need them. We build them. We have too much power hunger in our very beings to not do that. But we also have we have too much will to shape the world. Like, we want to shape the world. We want to make it better. And so I think institutions are somewhat inevitable. So I don't, and I think that's human nature. I think most people generally want to be led, as well. Decision making is hard and takes a lot of energy. Consensus is difficult to get, all that stuff. So I think they are inevitable. So I'm not really working towards, like, oh, I want the entire human civilization to be without hierarchy or institution. I think that's impossible. But I do want us to approach that in a different way. And the way to approach that is to see it as more finite and as more transient, and that these things are meant to change, and they're meant to change, within a generation. When I think about America and I think about the Constitution, drew up that document, within years they're working out, no, we didn't get it quite right. We need to make some amendments. And we need to, but why do we stop amending? Like when life changes and technology changes and values change, and our understanding and our knowledge increases so much. Like, so our knowledge and our understanding of race and of history and all this is vastly improved, and yet we have not changed the Constitution with any more amendments, however long. And so every institution needs to stay changing, and then when it starts to fail, we let it die, and we don't just like keep going because this is how we've always done it, or we don't just keep going because, oh, it still does a lot of good. Like, you can let things fail and let the need rise up new things. And I think if we get in technology, it's called like planned obsolescence, right? Like, it's like getting rid of like your old tech for new tech. Like, they plan it, whereas that's not good from a capitalist standpoint. But I do think a certain planned obsolescence in power structures is a really good thing. We need to think that anytime we institute any kind of power or power structure, that this will not last forever, and that it will die and it will change, and it will not fit future generations, and future generations should have total permission to start again and use whatever compost has fallen from the ground, from the thing that used to grow something new, and to talk about that from the beginning, and to talk about, this is the right thing for now, and when it's not the right thing anymore, we'll do something different. So that's kind of how I want us to approach it, whatever we're organizing in a different way.
Hey friends, do you love shifting culture and want more? Well, subscribe to shiftingculture.substack.com for as little as $5 a month and get early ad-free access to every episode, along with exclusive articles and reflections you won't find anywhere else. Exciting conversations are coming up with guests like Caroline Leaf, Tony Collier, David Gate, Brian McLaren, Leonard Sweet, and many more. So subscribe now, hear episodes first, and join the conversation. And remember, leaving a rating and review helps new listeners discover the show. So visit shiftingculture.substack.com and subscribe today. Now on with the episode. I think some people of faith have a hard time with change, saying that God is constant and the same, right?
Yeah.
And so if he's the same, we should always just be the same. How do you help people like uncover and unveil what does change look like, and why is change good to move us into better directions? I mean, there's constant change in the Bible. I know that. But I mean, some people are like, okay, God's constant and the same. We should stay the same, and we should never change, or we could go back to what was better in the
Yeah.
past,
Yeah, I mean, there's so many biblical stories about not returning, and you go somewhere new. One book that is on my mind because the author recently died is a book called "Praying the Psalms" by Walter Brueggemann, and he sadly died last week. And that was the very first Walter Brueggemann book I read, and it is about the process of harmony, disruption, and return. And really that happens not just in people groups but in relationships as well. There's harmony, there's disruption, and then some kind of restoration or some kind of return or some kind of moving on. Death and new life is a kind of resurrection, is a kind of return. So thinking about those processes and seeing how that's in the Psalms just constantly. Psalms of harmony, psalms of praise, psalms of disruption, and I don't know where I am, and like what's going on, and why have you forsaken me, and then songs and psalms of return. And that's really the story in Scripture, and it's actually the story of human civilization, and our individuals in human right. Like if you have, I've been with my partner for 25 years this year, and so like that's constantly happening: harmony, disruption, return, right? And that's just the nature of relationships. And I think if we can help people understand that that is just the nature of all things, and why we don't like that isn't, I don't think, I think emotionally is not oh, God's the same, so we must be the same, as much as I'm afraid of death. And I'm afraid of death, and I'm afraid of the great change that's coming. The final transformation. One more transformation that's just around the corner, and because we are afraid of that one transformation, or that one transformation happening to the people around us, then we kind of cling so tightly onto the thing we have now, or the thing we used to have that we thought was the best. And so, yeah, a lot of that is, again, I'm coming back to letting go of our godlike obsessions with ourselves, and accepting our place as a part of nature and part of this life. Yeah.
Part of this is what you've given to the world, and I think who we are. We're creative beings, and
Mm-hmm.
this is we're meant to create some art and beauty, and hopefully, a lot of people are creating destruction, and we want to resist that to create some beauty. One of the things that I know you did, in 2021, as you started this project, you didn't know it was a project. It was
Yeah.
something like, hey, I'm just going to throw up a poem a week on Instagram and see what happens. It turned into a place of rebellion, of care, and it turned into a place of resistance. This is a common theme that I'm talking about, but I don't think it started there. So I just want to know about the nature of art. And is art, true art, is it generally subversive? Is it something that is showing us what is underneath the pile of crap that we live in?
Yeah.
What is this nature of arts, and how did it start to unveil itself through your poetry?
I mean, art is a very broad and sometimes nebulous thing that people have different philosophies on art. My philosophy is really truth based. So what compels me artistically to write and create is not so much to make a pretty thing, though I do like pretty things, but to tell the truth, like that's what's the compelling thing. I have to find ways of getting what's inside out, and conversation doesn't always do that. And I have to find things that I can make and that can last, whether that be a poem or a picture or an essay or a book that marks certain moments in time, certain expressions of truth. And again, that changes over your life. But that's the creative impulse for me, is to say something that's true, and to my perspective, and everyone's perspective is a unique one, and that the world cannot have enough art, because the world cannot have enough expression of truth. And you don't have to kind of come up with the entire truth in every single piece. of work you do, but it has to express something that is true. And I think when it is something that is true, that's what resonates. That's what connects us through art. That's when, I can look at Rothko's paintings and and I just see these endless windows and doors that he's painting over and over again, and and it makes me think about thresholds, and it makes me think about what's on the other side, and it makes me think about everything I've been through already, all the windows I've looked through, and then I've gone to the other side, and here I am again, and this one's red, the last one was blue, and like it's over and over again, and that's what that art does for me. It resonates something true, and so that's what I'm trying to do in my work all the time, is just to express what I see as true in the forms that I've been given, in the forms that I've found, the forms that I'm good at, the ones that best grab what I'm willing to, wanting to put into the world, and just do my best with it. And then you learn as a artist how to grow in that, how to become more diligent in that. You learn your craft, you learn how to shape things better, you learn about form, you learn about what works, you learn the rules, then you learn how to break the rules, and all that stuff is just artistic discipline at that point.
The discipline's importance. I find it fascinating for you as you look back on your work after a year of posting and find a common theme. I mean, it was my wife and I just finished up about a year of in a creative cohort where we're creating pieces and sharing them with each other and getting feedback and all that. And one of the last exercises was to look back on everything you created and see what actually popped up, the common themes. And it was fascinating that there was a common theme in there. I mean, mine was about breaking cycles of revenge and violence, of generational cycles and cycles of subjugation. My wife's was really about the care for marginalized and the vulnerable. I find that important to know, like, what is really underneath the thing. What do I care about, and what do I value? That was the value for me, is now I could actually see, oh, that may be something that I could bring to the world because I've actually done this creative work. How did you move from just posting what do you think is true to actually seeing a type of common theme in your work and wanting it to bring that into the world?
I think it was a real shift over time, probably over a 20-year period. So from when I was a late teenager, early 20s, white man boy with opinions, right? And so it's opinion based. And I've still got opinions, got lots of them. But over time, I realized that my opinions are nowhere near as important as my values. And my values then begin to really shape the opinions. So then you're not reacting to everything that's going on in the world. Then you're not reacting to, you're not turning left and right, and you're not having all these contradictory opinions so much as, they then, things begin to make sense when you begin to understand your own value system. Now, for individuals, most of our value systems are inherited from whatever religious upbringing, every family upbringing, cultural upbringing we have. And I think as an individual, then you have to look at that and think, well, I have to decide, because not everything I was given was good. Maybe a lot of it was, but like not everything I was given was good. So then I have to decide, what is it that I'm going to value? And and people, particularly Christians, don't like doing that because they feel like I've been handed this Bible and I have to then conform my life to this Bible. But I began to realize in my 30s that like you can justify basically anything you want to do through the Bible. So rather than like go down that road that so many people I know, and I think I went down this road as well, of like, well, what does the original Greek say? What was the intention of the author? What was that? Like we get into a very theological, really get into hermeneutics, really trying to pass out what's the Bible really trying to say. And I would find that all these people that did that were still just really just justifying their own cultural values, right? Like, so I realized, that's not the game. The game is to choose, is to look at that Bible and say, What do I want to choose? And to totally be open to like, oh, I might be wrong, or like there might be there's nuance, there's complexity, there's things like that. But like really to say, oh, I'm going to choose what I value. These verses that speak to me, these are the Psalms that speak to me most. I'm going to go in that direction. And for me, that really was the words and life of Jesus. And to have that, it was the Gospels basically, particularly the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. And, from a teaching standpoint, I decided to prioritize that and then see everything that Paul writes through the lens of what Jesus said rather than the other way around. And once I kind of began to do that, it was like, yeah, these are my values. Like this is what I value. This is how I want to be in the world. And like, so for me, writing poetry, moving away from writing theology or writing opinion pieces, writing those kind of essays, where I was being very fair and reasonable and trying to, like making arguments and counter arguments, and moving away from all of that into, oh, I'm going to talk like Jesus did, which is more mysteriously than anyone likes. And, and just avoid, like I avoid doctrines in my work. I avoid statements of belief in my work. Statements of value are all over my work. Like, so my values are all over my work, but my statements of beliefs and doctrines, I think you'd be difficult to really piece together, what I believe theologically from my work. And that's very intentional. I do not want to do that. I don't want to be in theological spaces. I want to be in creative spaces. And for people who have open minds and open hearts, and that's who I'm talking to, I have no time really for doctrinal arguments.
As we move forward in like a values-based community, is there a poem or something that you have written that spoke to you and unveiled some of your values in your work?
Yeah, this is I'm going to read this one. It's one of my most popular ones, and it's the title of one of the chapters, and it's called "Friendship Will Save Us." And so there's a whole chapter in this book about friendship, and I really put the emphasis on that when we're building communities, it doesn't begin with the family unit. It begins with our chosen friendships. The family unit is really just where we learn how to be good friends, like how we learn commitment, how we learn forgiveness. But really, those things have to translate into friendships. Otherwise, we just have a slightly healthy family unit, and that's useless to the world. Like we really need to have good friendships. Like that is what will save us. That was what will bind us. That was what will get us through. So this is the poem, "Friendship Will Save Us." Friendship is what will save us. So fall deeply in love with your friends. Date them, woo them, pursue them, mark your anniversaries, celebrate your victories. Take care of their names when they're not in the room. Create a space for them where all truths are tender, for intimacy doesn't have to be reserved for romance, and crushes do not belong only to lovers. So don't hide it when you find a bona fide ride or die.
I think friendship is so key. How do we do this in this loneliness epidemic that we have, where we don't know how to be friends, or we think that, hey, we have more so-called friends on social media than we ever have before, but we don't actually have your ride or die. You don't have those people that will actually save us. How do we be vulnerable and be in relationship with others?
I think it's really difficult. I think friendship's always difficult, but I think particularly now I think COVID peeled back many of the layers of friendships, and stripped us back and really forced us into isolation, and it's been very difficult for people to break that spell. I do think it is possible, and not just possible, absolutely necessary. And people don't like this, but you have to be the friend that you want to see in the world. And even if that means you get rejected. And and if we're talking in terms of Christian responses, like that's the way of Jesus. You act how you feel like human beings should act in the world, even if it means rejection. So you put yourself out there, you help others, And yes, is that like painful and costly where you don't get the same return back from those friendships? But guess what? That's just a capitalist way of looking at relationships. Like they're transactional. Like I help you, you help me. I help you this much, you help me that much. Like I hate I hate watching friends online like Venmo each other for like coffee and stuff like that. I'm like, just buy each other a fucking coffee. Like, I just, like, and I get it if your friend's broke or whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that every time you Venmo someone for coffee, that's bad. I'm just saying, like, we can't be in transactional relationships, right? So we can't be in relationships where we think of, and like, I mean, obviously we can't be in truly one-way relationships either. Like when people are not giving you anything back and they're just taking, like that's not healthy either. But no, I think like you have to understand that if you're going to venture this brave new world in our COVID isolated technological terms, that you're going to have to give and not get everything back that you've given, and that's okay. And that's how relationships are built and formed. That's how trust is built and formed. The other thing I think is really important, and I think it's a huge problem in my generation, is flakiness. And so not showing up, canceling, like we all joke about it. Oh, we love it when people cancel. And, like we all love it, to have another evening at home, doing the exact same thing we did yesterday, watching streaming shows and eating ice cream and, like having a wine at 6 o'clock, and and we all like that, and we all feel like we need it, and I get it, but like you have to show up for your friends, you have to turn up for their gigs, you have to go to their shows, you have to, when they say let's grab a coffee, you grab a coffee, you commit. Like once we're just so willing to flake, I think, and that hurts, and so that would be I think number one thing you could turn around tomorrow is just don't flake. Just when you say you're going to meet someone, just show up and meet them. Like showing up is so much of life. Like, you show up for your friends, you show up for your art, you show up for the things you value, you show up for your community. Like if you can just keep showing up, you don't even have to be good at any of this. You don't have to be good at friendship. You don't have to be good at art. You don't have to be good at community building. But if you keep showing up, it will get built and it will happen. Right. So like that is the number one. You just got to show up. You can't be flaky.
This is the hardest thing in America, is show up for each other. But when we do, we feel so much better than if we just stayed home and we watched a streaming show, which I love streaming shows. So I want to actually just talk about a streaming show right now and talk about Andor. I was listening to Tony Gilroy, who created Andor, wrote it. One of the things that he says, he thinks that one of his through lines and his values in all of his work that he has done is the importance and value of community, and how community will actually help transform us. And this is what we need. I know you have a great Substack article on Andor. I love that article, and I love what you say about what this rebellion actually is and how it actually takes all of us. What do we see in Andor, this weird Star Wars without lightsabers type of show that is just resonant with all of our lives at the moment? What do we start to learn? Give me some Andor love.
Andor season 1 was incredibly coagulating for my book, and I'd watched season 1. I think it came out in 22, and so I had watched it, and I was already writing like in that direction. And then after I got the book deal, and I knew like, oh, this is actually happening. Like I went and rewatched it, because I think my kids hadn't seen it, and so we sat down and we watched it together. And so I watched it through the second time, and it emotionally, just where we were, I think this was 2023, and so like there's an election coming up, and it's like just the moments we were finding ourselves in. I just found it so resonant for both the time we're in and for my work in particular about forming rebellion. And so that was when really I started to think, oh, I need to lean into the rebellion aspect of this, and it not just be about, like because I think because I write about care a lot, I write about friendship a lot, I write about looking after yourself a lot, looking after your body, looking after your mind, your spiritual life. I write, like all those things can lean wellness, right? Like so, all those things can lean towards a certain. Just look after yourself. You've got this. You're that kind of way of being in the world, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to really lean into rebellion and community, and how to marry those things together. So Andor was incredibly formative. One of the chapters is named after a line from the show. There's at least one actual line from Andor that I've put in the last poem of the books in there. And I was listening to the soundtrack as I was writing some of that stuff. And so hugely important. I think Andor as a show is an absolute miracle. Like to have this Disney produced Star Wars show that is so willing to get into the difficult nature of building and forming rebellions against empire it's just amazing. It is so well written. The characters are so well formed. It's I don't think you need to know anything about Star Wars to enjoy it. Like if you just like good TV, the writing and acting and direction is so good. Especially if you have any kind of politics that leans towards the rebellious rather than the empire. Like I think it will all resonate for you. But if you do have a little bit of Star Wars in you and you do like a little Star Wars, then it's just a dream come true. It's like everything that I ever wanted, and I have adored it. And then season 2, which just came out after I finished the book, and it's as good as season 1, and they wrapped it up so perfectly and very emotional, very inspiring. And then we record. I don't know when this podcast is being released, but we're recording this the first week of June, and there's the response in LA that's happening now to protests towards ICE, and you're just seeing the same thing. You're seeing these armed guards turning up, the military showing up to protests and sparking violence in order to justify further violence, and we live on Gorman. Like that's where we are, and that's what we're seeing. It's perfectly at this moment. So I found it very, very informative and inspiring.
It is. So how do we do that then? So as we stand up, as we rebel against the empire. So even now, as saying, hey, these ICE raids that are just going to take people away without due process at all, which is part of what's supposed to be part of our value system in America, is that people have some due process. So we're rebelling against something that we think is incredibly unjust and shouldn't happen, rebelling against the empire. How do we do that without becoming empire ourselves? I think that's this is. I think this is the nature of rebellion, is it becomes empire at times. Can we stop becoming the empire ourselves?
Yeah, I do think the only way to do that is to let go of power once you've got it, and which I think for me is one of the most compelling things about Jesus Christ. And so, once he had formed an absolute horde of people following him around, he just realized that this isn't good and started shedding followers left, right, and center, saying things that would frustrate them and annoy them and confound them. And then even when he enters Jerusalem, and it's make way, and it's palm leaves, and it's riding on a donkey, and he's making this massive political statement, and he's kind of coalesced a movement at that point. Like even if he wasn't meaning to, like there's this moment where he could really ratchet it up politically, and what he does is spends that week saying the most difficult things that he says, and just absolutely shedding followers until he's left alone. He's become so dangerous that even his friends deny him. And so I do think like that is the way to avoid becoming empire yourself, is to stay so true to your values and so true to your perception of the world that you are not blinded by the ability to shape the world into your image, but instead you let it go, and you die when it's your time to die, and you embrace that, and you move over when it's your turn to move over. And I think you have to model that and display that for other people, and not try and control it, not thinking, well, if I move over, someone worse will take over. Like if I move over, it won't be as good. If I move over, then the things that I've instituted will fall and die. Everything falls and dies. Like you have to be able to willing to let it go. And do I think that's going to happen? Like, say, if like the rebellions in this country, I say we get a populist left-wing movement that takes over the powers of government. Do I think it's going to take that road of letting go? Probably not. That's the history of the human race. But I think the good people will. I think the bravest of us will, and will leave a more powerful legacy because of it. And going back to Star Wars, going back to the original Star Wars and New Hope, and Obi-Wan realizing that he's going to become more powerful than Vader can ever imagine by displaying to Luke that what you do is you give up your life. And so he just gives up in the fight and just dies, and therefore becomes more powerful, inspiring both Luke and Leia, which is the first time Luke and Leia are together in their lives, and displays this way of giving up, which then Luke then models later on in a very controversial movie, which I love that movie, The Last Jedi. But I know it's very controversial.
I love The Last Jedi.
Yeah, same.
I know it is, but I love The Last Jedi.
And I like the way he comes through his own path to that same conclusion that Obi-Wan comes to, that the way to model it to Rey is to lose his own life and to disappear into the Force. And that's all any of us can do. So the way you avoid becoming an empire, the way you avoid becoming the thing you hate is to disappear into the Force.
That is so hard. I pray that we can get there and we can actually embody these ways of Jesus and Obi-Wan Kenobi in our lives, and figure this thing out. David, if you could talk to people who pick up Rebellion of Care, this book, read your poetry, what hope do you have for your work and the people who read it?
My real hope with the person who picks up this book is that they see that a rebellion of care is right there and present in the very lives they have now. So it's not that you have to radically change your life. It's not that you have to suddenly become someone different, adopt some new principles, that really almost everyone who picks up this book will have principles of love and care and compassion already, and will believe that art changes things and friendship changes things. These are not like new ideas particularly as such. And so what I was hoping this book does is that it really inspires you that this life is within your hands already. It is the life you already have. It is what you already value. You just need to become radicalized into the life you already have, and not just let it passively slip you by, but like to actually live truly to what you already believe.
Good. Couple real quick questions at the end. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
I would keep writing, don't stop writing, and keep sharing it. So I've always written. I didn't ever stop writing, but I did stop sharing. I did stop because I didn't get all of the external affirmation that I needed to bolster my confidence. I think I would really encourage my 21-year-old self to you don't need the external validation. You just need to keep sharing, and eventually you'll find your people. You'll eventually find people who appreciate your voice and your voice resonates with them. But the only way to do that is to keep putting it out and risk looking weak and small and useless and not very good at writing, because guess what? You're not very good at writing. And so that's okay. That's just part of the process. Yeah.
Great. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
I'm currently reading a book called We Tell Ourselves Stories, which is a book by Alyssa Wilkinson, who is a film critic for the New York Times. But she's written this book about Joan Didion, and about Joan Didion, particularly Joan Didion's relationship with Hollywood, because she was a screenwriter herself. She lived in LA and the LA area and was part of that world, but was also a film critic herself. And so her relationship with that and the relationship with Hollywood and power. What I love about Joan Didion and Joan Didion was someone I really lent on for these essays, is she just told the truth. So she wasn't really an analyst, and she wasn't really a commenter as much as she observed and she told the truth as she saw it. And that was most powerful about her writing. And so that's what I've tried more and more to adopt into my own writing, is just to tell the truth of how I see the world and let that be the power, rather than like trying to convince someone or something. There's not really much convincing going on in Joan Didion's work. And so I love this book. This book is phenomenal. I'm really enjoying it. So
I loved We Tell Ourselves Stories. It's good. I was able to interview Alyssa about it on the podcast, and it's a fantastic book. It was really good.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, good recommendation. Yeah, good recommendation. Yeah, A Rebellion of Care should be available anywhere books are sold, and go.
Yes.
And yeah, get it. Is there anywhere particularly you'd love to point people to be able to get it, or how could they connect with you?
Yes. So if you're going to buy the book, I would love it if you bought it from your local indie bookstore. That's how I jive. I'm not really an Amazon guy. If you have
Not
to
from the
Amazon,
Empire.
then, well, I mean, like, I'd rather you buy it than not. But I would rather you spend the extra $1 or whatever it is to get it from your local bookstore. If you want a signed copy, or you don't have a local bookstore that you want to support, you can support my local bookstore, which is called Malaprops in Asheville, North Carolina. And they have signed copies, and you can order one of those signed copies online. And if you pre-order, it comes with a print. Yeah, and then I'm just online, davidgatepoet.com, if you want to buy any of my prints or stickers. I'm on Instagram at davidgatepoet, and my Substack, which I'm really devoting a lot of time and energy into writing something I think good and worthwhile every week. I'm really giving it my all to write in these trying times every week, and give people something to cling to, and something to hopefully inspire and challenge and all of that stuff. So you can find me on Substack too.
Excellent. Well, David, thank you. I love this conversation. It was such a joy to connect and to have this conversation with you. And I'd love to finish and end this conversation with a poem. If you have one more in you.
Yes, I do.
It would be great for you to read a poem as we head out from our conversation.
Okay, so this is really a poem about what I was talking about, that you find the rebellion of care in your own life. Okay. And in the very smallness and ordinariness of your own life. And this is called the font. This kitchen sink, the font of my home, where bread pans soak and milk bottles swill, where we wash paint pots and brushes in the aftermath of craft, where salad leaves rinse to be rid of bugs and soil, where I clean the abrasions of my working hands and all the blood from the little cuts of constant use, in repetition and never-ending chore. I come to these sacred waters daily to baptize the entirety of my holy life.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a great conversation. Loved it. So thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out. Share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.